Retired Cowboy lived alone for years, until 5 Apache widows begged for shelter on his ranch. Tom Harris had always been a man of the land. From the time he was a boy, he felt more at home under the wide-open sky than anywhere else. His childhood was spent running through fields, learning to ride horses before he could even walk properly, and helping his father with chores on their small family ranch. Life taught him early on that work, and patience went hand in hand. By the time he was a teenager, Tom was already skilled with cattle, horses, and the ways of the wild. But more than anything, he learned the quiet lessons of solitude. As he grew older, Tom's life followed the rhythm of the land. He became a full-time cowboy, riding long hours under the blazing sun, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and watching over the vast, empty stretches of Arizona desert that he loved. He had friends among the local ranchers and neighbors, but most of the time he preferred to be alone. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest, and it gave him a sense of freedom that no town or city ever could. When he met his wife, Mary, life felt complete. She shared his love for the land, the animals, and the quiet moments that came with sunset. They built a life together, small but full of warmth. For years, they laughed, worked, and dreamed under the same wide sky, raising a family and taking pride in the ranch they nurtured. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. One winter, Mary fell ill, and despite Tom's desperate efforts to save her, she passed away. The world, once bright with shared laughter, suddenly became empty and cold. After her passing, Tom retreated deeper into the solitude he had always known. The ranch became his only companion, the land his closest friend. The once lively home echoed with silence, and he found comfort in the routines that connected him to life, even without Mary. He tended the animals, fed the horses, and fixed broken fences, all with a steady hand and a quiet heart. Each day, he walked the fields, feeling the wind on his face and the earth beneath his boots, finding peace in the simple rhythms of work. Neighbors occasionally visited, but mostly Tom kept to himself. He was polite, nodding and exchanging brief words when necessary, but he never invited anyone into the quiet world he had built around him. His life was measured in the rising and setting of the sun, in the sound of cattle lowing across the plains, and in the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. In his solitude, Tom discovered a kind of freedom he hadn't known before. There were no obligations, no interruptions, just the land and him. Tom's days were long but fulfilling. Each morning he would rise before dawn, the cold air biting at his cheeks, and feed the animals. He knew each horse by name, each cow by its markings, and each chicken by its cluck. Work was not just duty, it was connection. Even the chores that others might consider mundane had a rhythm that brought him peace. Repairing fences, stacking firewood, or mending saddles became a meditation of sorts, a way to remain grounded in a world that often felt unpredictable. Yet, even in the quiet, there was a part of Tom that remembered the warmth of human presence. Memories of Mary's laughter, the smell of her cooking, and the comfort of her hand in his would come unexpectedly. Some days, the longing was sharp, like the sting of winter wind against his skin. He missed the companionship, the conversation, and the shared experiences that had once been the center of his life. But over time, he had learned to accept that this was now his life, and he had made peace with it. In the evenings, Tom would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The horizon seemed endless, and he often found himself lost in thought, remembering the past, contemplating the present, and quietly imagining what the future might hold. The stars would emerge one by one, and the silence of the desert night wrapped around him like a blanket. It was in these moments that he felt most alive, most connected to the world in his own solitary way. Despite the loneliness, there was a sense of pride in the life Tom had built. The ranch was thriving under his care, the land fertile and strong, and the animals healthy and well-tended. He had no desire for fame or recognition. His satisfaction came from seeing the results of his labor, knowing that his hands had shaped and protected something enduring. The land was unforgiving at times, with harsh weather, unpredictable storms, and long stretches of drought, but it also gave back, teaching resilience, patience, and respect for the natural world. Tom also had small routines that brought him joy. He enjoyed the occasional visit to town for supplies, exchanging friendly greetings with the locals, and listening to the stories of old friends. On rare occasions, he would ride into the nearby canyons, exploring trails that wound through the hills and valleys, feeling the wind in his hair and the thrill of adventure he had known all his life. These journeys reminded him that the world was vast and full of beauty, even if he experienced it alone. As the years passed, Tom became known as the solitary cowboy of the region. Stories of his dedication to the land and his quiet, dependable nature spread among the neighboring ranchers. Some admired him, some pitied him, but all recognized that he had found a unique kind of freedom in his solitude. He had created a life that was completely his own, shaped by hard work, respect for the land, and a deep understanding of himself. Yet, despite his contentment, life had a way of introducing the unexpected. Tom's quiet world, built carefully over years of solitude, was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He had spent decades in the company of memories and animals, but soon, the winds of fate would bring strangers to his doorstep, strangers who needed shelter, warmth, and kindness. And although he could not foresee it, Tom would discover that the heart he thought had closed forever still had room for connection, compassion, and perhaps even a new kind of family. For now, though, he remained on the porch as the desert night settled in, listening to the distant call of a coyote and the gentle rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. The stars shone brightly above, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the small but significant life he had carved out for himself. Tom Harris, the retired cowboy who lived alone, felt the quiet satisfaction of a life lived honestly, fully, and in harmony with the land he loved. Little did he know, this life of solitude was about to be enriched in ways he had never imagined, all beginning with a cold winter night and 5 unexpected visitors. The winter had settled deep into the desert, painting the land with frost and biting winds that rattled the trees and whipped across the open plains. Tom Harris was tending his cattle, his breath rising in white clouds as he checked each animal for signs of illness or fatigue. Life on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, the silence of the desert interrupted only by the sounds of his work, the wind, and the occasional cry of a hawk. He was accustomed to the solitude, even welcomed it. The quiet was comforting. It was his life, and he knew it well. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent behind the jagged mountains, Tom noticed something unusual on the horizon. At first, it was a blur, a cluster of small dark shapes that seemed to move across the frosted plains. Squinting, he realized they were people, 5 figures walking slowly, burdened and weary. Their clothes were torn and patched, their movements deliberate and exhausted. Tom's first instinct was caution. Strangers in the desert could be dangerous. He gripped the reins of his horse tightly and watched, heart pounding with curiosity and a twinge of concern. The figures drew closer, and Tom could see their faces clearly. They were women, 5 of them, and their eyes told a story of hardship, loss, and desperation. Their skin was sun-tanned and lined, not from age alone but from years of hard living under the harsh sun. Their hands were calloused from work and struggle, and their expressions carried a mix of fear, hope, and resilience. Tom recognized something familiar in their eyes, a quiet strength that reminded him of Mary, his late wife, and the determination he had always admired in those who lived close to the land. As they approached the edge of his property, Tom felt a mixture of hesitation and curiosity. Who were they? Why were they here? And why now in the coldest week of winter with no apparent destination in sight? He dismounted slowly, keeping his horse between himself and the women, a silent barrier and a gesture of caution. The women stopped a short distance away, shivering in the icy wind, and one of them stepped forward. "My name is Ayana," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "We have nowhere else to go. Please, sir, we only ask for shelter for the night, just until the storm passes." Tom's heart tightened. Shelter, they said, just for the night, but he could see that these women had traveled far and suffered much. There was no sign of deception in their eyes, only desperation. He studied them carefully. There were 5 in total, each carrying the remnants of their belongings in small bundles. He noticed the careful way they supported one another, a silent agreement to protect and help one another through hardship. "They are Apache widows," Yana continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Our homes were destroyed in a fire. We have no family to turn to. Please, we only ask for help. One night, that is all." Tom felt a pang of empathy mixed with uncertainty. He had lived alone for years, and the thought of strangers, especially a group of women, entering his quiet sanctuary was unsettling. His instincts screamed caution. The desert could be unforgiving, and he had always prided himself on being self-reliant. Yet, he could not ignore the humanity in front of him, the raw need for warmth, food, and protection. His hands relaxed slightly on the reins. "5, he said slowly, his voice rough but not unkind. "It's a long ride here. You must be cold, hungry, and tired." Yana nodded. "Yes, sir, we mean no trouble, only shelter and safety." Tom looked back toward his ranch, the small house and barn bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He thought of the empty rooms, the quiet halls that had echoed with the memories of merry and better days. He thought of his life, structured and orderly, predictable in ways that had been comforting for years, and yet he could not turn them away. The desert could be cruel, and he had survived by extending compassion when it mattered. "All right," he said finally, "come with me. But you follow the rules and you respect this land. That's all I ask." Relief washed over Ayana's face, and the other women exchanged glances of gratitude. Slowly, they followed him across the frosted ground, their feet crunching against the thin layer of snow. Tom led them to the barn, where hay had been stacked high for the horses, and there was enough space to create a small area for them to rest. He helped them settle, offering blankets and dry straw for warmth. The women worked quietly, unburdening themselves, folding their sparse belongings, and arranging a small corner of the barn for comfort. They were polite and cautious, aware that they were intruding into a man's private world. Tom watched them with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. They were not helpless. They moved with purpose and dignity, even in their exhaustion. Over the next few days, Tom observed how they adjusted to the ranch. He provided food, simple meals of beans, bread, and stew, but they contributed as well, gathering firewood, helping feed the animals, and keeping their area tidy. Their gratitude was evident in every action, yet there was no expectation, no entitlement. They were survivors, carrying the strength of generations who had known hardship and learned to endure. Communication was not easy at first. Tom spoke in his straightforward cowboy manner, while the women occasionally struggled to find the right words in English. Yet gestures, patience, and shared work bridged the gaps. They taught him small things in return: how to preserve certain herbs, how to recognize edible plants in the desert, and even a few words in their native language. Slowly, a bond began to form, built on respect, need, and the unspoken understanding of what it meant to survive alone. Despite the cold and the hardships outside, the barn began to feel warmer, not just from the fire they built, but from the shared presence of people who cared for one another. Tom noticed that his heart, long accustomed to solitude, was responding to their quiet kindness. He had never been particularly good at expressing feelings, but small gestures, a cup of hot tea, A blanket tossed over a shivering shoulder or a soft word of encouragement became natural. He realized that in their vulnerability there was strength, and in their trust there was something he had not felt in many years: connection. The days passed slowly, and the storm that had driven them to the ranch showed no sign of relenting. Yet Tom no longer saw the situation as a temporary burden. He began to appreciate the presence of the women. Their laughter, soft and tentative at first, brought life to the silent ranch. Their stories, shared quietly by the fire at night, spoke of families lost, traditions preserved, and the wisdom of generations. Tom listened more than he spoke, letting their experiences wash over him and reshape his understanding of community, resilience, and human connection. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars appeared over the desert, Ayana approached Tom while he checked the fence lines. "You've been kind," she said softly. "We did not expect anyone to help us, not like this." Tom shrugged, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "Everyone needs a little help now and then," he said gruffly. "I've had my share of help over the years too. You're welcome here." Her eyes softened. "Thank you, Tom, truly." The wind howled outside, but inside the barn there was warmth, safety, and a quiet understanding that had formed between them. Tom realized that life could still surprise him, that even after years of solitude, new bonds could form and new responsibilities could bring meaning. The women were not just strangers seeking shelter. They were a reminder that compassion and courage could transform loneliness into something richer, more enduring. Over the following weeks, the women continued to settle in. Tom began to teach them about the ranch, how to care for the animals, and how to navigate the land safely. In return, they taught him about their traditions, their skills, and their resilience. He found himself learning from them, appreciating their wisdom, and valuing the connections that were slowly but surely reshaping his quiet, ordered life. Though the arrival of the widows had disrupted the routine he had maintained for years, Tom Harris began to see that this disruption was not a burden, it was a gift. For the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of hope, purpose, and a sense of family he thought he had lost forever. And as the sun rose over the ranch each morning, he looked out over the land and the 5 women who had unexpectedly become a part of his life, feeling a quiet gratitude for the winter storm that had brought them to his doorstep. Life on the ranch had slowly begun to change. The cold winter wind still swept across the plains, but inside the barn and the small living quarters, there was a new warmth, not just from the fire, but from the presence of the 5 women who had found shelter there. Tom Harris, the solitary cowboy who had spent years living alone, found himself adjusting to a life he had never imagined. Their arrival had disrupted the quiet routine he had held for so long, yet over time, he began to see that their presence brought something he had been missing for many years: connection, purpose, and the subtle joys of companionship. At first, there was a careful distance between Tom and the women. He had lived alone for so long that sharing his space felt strange, almost unnatural. He was used to ordering his days exactly as he pleased, completing chores in silence and speaking only when necessary. The women, too, were cautious. They had been through much hardship and knew the importance of being respectful and unobtrusive. Each day was a delicate balance, a quiet negotiation of space, routine, and trust. Tom observed them closely. Each woman had a role, even without being told. Yana, the eldest, naturally took the lead, organizing small tasks, gathering firewood, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Others tended to the animals, helped with cleaning, or prepared simple meals. Their work was quiet but steady, and Tom couldn't help but notice how capable and disciplined they were. Despite the vulnerability in their situation, there was a strong sense of resilience and dignity in everything they did. Communication remained a challenge at first. Tom's language was direct, rooted in years of ranch life, while the women sometimes struggled to express themselves fully in English. Yet they found ways to understand one another. Gestures, expressions, and patient listening became bridges over the gaps in speech. Tom learned to recognize small cues, the way Ayana's hands trembled when she was cold, or how another woman's eyes would light up when she successfully completed a task. Through these quiet observations, trust began to grow, not through words, but through actions and shared experiences. One morning, Tom noticed that the women had built a small garden in a corner of the yard, using seeds and soil they had saved from their previous home. Though it was modest, it represented hope and continuity, a way to honor their traditions and keep their spirits alive. Tom watched as they carefully planted the seeds, dug furrows, and watered the soil with a precision that revealed their familiarity with the land. He realized that they were not just seeking shelter, they were striving to rebuild their lives, even in the harsh conditions of the desert. Over time, a routine began to form. Mornings were spent tending animals, repairing fences, and preparing food. Afternoons were devoted to small projects, mending clothes, gathering firewood, or maintaining the barn. Evenings were for conversation by the fire, a time when stories were shared. Laughter echoed softly through the barn, and the bonds of trust strengthened. Tom began to appreciate the rhythm, finding comfort in the shared labor and the sense of purpose it brought. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now felt alive with activity, warmth, and human presence. The women also taught Tom many things he had never considered. They shared knowledge of edible plants, medicinal herbs, and ways to preserve food for the long winters. They spoke of Apache traditions, the stories of their ancestors, and the importance of community and respect for the land. Tom listened attentively, fascinated by the wisdom they carried. In return, he taught them about ranch life, the ways to care for cattle, handle horses, and navigate the often unforgiving desert terrain. Together, they exchanged knowledge, bridging the gap between two different worlds through mutual respect and curiosity. Trust, however, was not built overnight. There were moments of tension, small misunderstandings that needed patience to resolve. Tom struggled with his old habits of independence, sometimes wanting to retreat into silence when decisions needed to be made. The women, too, occasionally questioned his choices, suggesting different approaches or expressing concerns. But each challenge became an opportunity to strengthen the bond between them. They learned to listen, to compromise, and to value the perspectives of others. Slowly, a sense of mutual respect developed, a foundation upon which deeper connections could grow. One afternoon, as Tom and Ayana repaired a section of fence damaged by winter storms, they spoke quietly about their pasts. Ayana shared stories of her family, the fire that had destroyed their home, and the hardships she and the others had faced. Her voice was calm, but her eyes reflected the pain of loss and the strength of survival. Tom listened, nodding occasionally, offering quiet words of sympathy. For the first time in many years, he found himself opening up about Mary, about the life he had shared with her, and about the loneliness that had followed her passing. The act of sharing brought relief, a sense of connection that had been absent for far too long. As days turned into weeks, the initial caution faded. Laughter began to echo through the barn during mealtimes. Shared meals became occasions of conversation and storytelling. The women, who had once been strangers and cautious guests, were slowly becoming part of the ranch, part of Tom's life. The work they did together was not just physical labor, it was building a home, a safe space, and a sense of belonging. Tom began to realize that this partnership was transforming his life in ways he had never expected. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink with the setting sun, Tom walked with the women to check the animals. They moved together, a small but united group, each contributing to the safety and care of the ranch. The women's presence was no longer an intrusion but a welcome addition, a new rhythm that harmonized with the old. Tom felt a sense of pride in how well they worked together, and a quiet satisfaction in seeing the women regain strength and confidence. There were also moments of personal growth. Tom discovered patience he had not known he possessed, empathy that had been dormant, and joy in small interactions. A shared smile, a helping hand, a kind word. The women, in turn, gained trust in someone outside their immediate circle, learning that vulnerability did not always lead to danger, and that kindness could be found even in unexpected places. Together, they created an environment of mutual care and understanding, proving that resilience and compassion could flourish even in difficult circumstances. As winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring, the ranch began to transform. The garden Iana and the others had planted was starting to sprout, bringing color and life to the otherwise barren landscape. The barn, once a place of shelter and solitude, had become a home filled with warmth, light, and laughter. Tom watched this transformation with quiet awe, recognizing that the women had not only survived, they had brought vitality and hope to a place that had been quiet for too long. Tom's perspective on life also shifted. He realized that solitude, while comforting, had its limits. Connection, trust, and community were equally important. The women's presence reminded him that life was richer when shared, and that even a man who had lived alone for decades could find fulfillment in relationships built on respect and care. He began to plan for the future, thinking of ways to ensure the ranch could continue as a safe and nurturing place for those in need, just as it had become for the 5 widows. By the end of the season, trust had fully taken root. The women moved freely around the ranch, contributing to daily tasks, sharing knowledge and forming bonds not just with Tom, but with each other. Tom, once wary of the disruption their presence had caused, now relied on their support, valued their opinions, and cherished the companionship they offered. The ranch was no longer simply a piece of land he maintained. It had become a living, breathing community, small but resilient, grounded in mutual respect and care. And so, life continued on the ranch. Days were filled with work, learning, laughter, and shared experiences. Winter storms would come and go, animals needed care, and chores never ceased. Yet through it all, Tom and the 5 women had built something enduring: trust, friendship, and a sense of family that transcended traditional boundaries. In the quiet moments, as the sun set over the desert and the wind whispered through the plains, Tom Harris felt a deep gratitude. The ranch was no longer just his sanctuary. It was a home, alive with the presence of those who had once been strangers, now bound together by hardship, resilience, and the slow, steady growth of trust. Life on the ranch had completely transformed since the 5 widows had arrived. What had once been a quiet, solitary place was now alive with activity, warmth, and laughter. The mornings were no longer just about Tom's routine. They were filled with the shared work of a small, united family. Each day, everyone had a role, and every contribution mattered. The ranch, which had once been a place of isolation, had become a living, breathing community of care, respect, and cooperation. Tom Harris, the retired cowboy who had spent years in solitude, had discovered something he had thought was lost forever: connection. The women were no longer guests. They were part of his life, part of the ranch, and in many ways part of his family. He noticed the subtle changes in himself. He smiled more often, laughed more freely, and felt a renewed energy as he worked alongside them. His days, once long and quiet, were now rich with purpose and companionship. Iana, the eldest, naturally took the lead in organizing tasks. She was skilled and wise, ensuring that chores were divided fairly and completed efficiently. The other women each found their place, caring for animals, tending the small garden, mending clothing, and helping with meals. Tom was amazed at how quickly they adapted to ranch life. They worked tirelessly but never complained, and their efforts brought not only practical help but also a sense of harmony to the household. The widows had also brought their own traditions: quietly enriching the life of the ranch. They taught Tom about herbs, natural remedies, and the medicinal plants that grew wild in the desert. They showed him how to preserve food, make homemade soaps, and even create small crafts from natural materials. These skills, passed down through generations, were valuable and practical, but they also carried a deeper significance, a connection to heritage, resilience, and community. Tom listened attentively, eager to learn and humbled by the knowledge they shared. The afternoons were often spent together in shared projects. Tom taught the women how to ride horses more confidently, handle livestock safely, and manage the daily demands of the ranch. In return, the women shared their stories, tales of family, loss, survival, and hope. They spoke of their lives before the fire, of their childhoods, and of the traditions that had shaped them. Tom listened quietly, feeling the weight of their experiences and the strength they carried. It was in these moments, sitting together by the fire or walking the plains, that trust deepened and bonds strengthened. Evenings became the heart of life on the ranch. After long days of work, everyone would gather around the fire for meals and conversation. The sound of laughter echoed through the barn and the yard, a stark contrast to the silence that had once dominated the property. The women cooked together, sharing recipes and teaching Tom new ways to prepare meals. They talked, joked, and told stories late into the night, filling the spaces of the ranch with warmth, light, and life. Tom began to notice how much he had changed since their arrival. He had been cautious and hesitant at first, protective of his solitude and wary of strangers. But over time, he realized that opening his doors to the widows had brought unexpected joy. He felt needed, valued, and connected. Their presence reminded him that life was richer when shared, and that even someone who had lived alone for decades could find happiness in companionship and community. The widows also began to develop their own sense of belonging. At first they had been cautious, wary of imposing on Tom's life. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, they grew comfortable in the space he had provided. They felt safe, valued, and respected. They laughed more freely, worked with confidence, and even began to teach one another new skills. Each woman found her place not just physically on the ranch but emotionally in the household. Together, they created a sense of home that had been missing for so long. Tom was particularly moved by the way the women cared for the animals. They treated the horses, cows, and chickens with patience, gentleness, and understanding. Their hands were skilled, their movements confident, and their compassion evident. Watching them, Tom realized that they were more than survivors. They were nurturers, teachers, and partners in life on the ranch. Their care extended beyond the animals, touching him and shaping the atmosphere of the entire property. As spring approached, the small garden the women had planted began to bloom. The green shoots and colorful flowers symbolized renewal, growth, and hope. The widows tended the garden carefully, teaching Tom how to plant seeds, water them, and nurture the soil. It became a source of pride for all of them, a tangible reminder that even after hardship, life could flourish. Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude as he watched the garden grow, knowing that this symbol of life was a product of shared effort, care, and trust. The local community began to take notice of the changes on Tom's ranch. Neighbors who had once viewed him as a solitary, reclusive man now saw a household alive with activity and kindness. Some were curious, others inspired. People came by occasionally, offering small gifts or stopping for conversation, and Tom found that he no longer felt uncomfortable with visitors. The widows, with their grace and resilience, had transformed the ranch into a place of hospitality, generosity, and warmth. One day, a neighbor asked Tom how he managed to welcome the women so openly, despite having lived alone for so long. Tom smiled and replied simply, "Sometimes, life gives you the chance to open your doors, and you realize that helping others also helps you." I thought I was protecting myself by living alone, but in truth, they've given me more than I could have imagined. The women themselves began to form a routine of teaching and sharing. They passed on small skills and lessons from their heritage, showing Tom and each other ways to live sustainably and respectfully with the land. They told stories of their ancestors, shared traditions of music and dance, and even began small celebrations for milestones and special occasions. The ranch had become more than a home. It was now a place of culture, learning, and community. Tom noticed changes in himself that went beyond practical skills or routines. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. His heart, long accustomed to solitude, had expanded to include care, love, and responsibility for others. The quiet moments of reflection now included gratitude for companionship and recognition of the strength that comes from shared effort. He realized that life was not meant to be lived in isolation alone. It was meant to be shared, nurtured, and celebrated with those around you. The women, too, had begun to heal. The fire that had destroyed their homes and separated them from their families had left scars, but in this new household, they found a sense of safety, belonging, and hope. They laughed more, sang softly while working, and began to dream of the future once again. Together, they had created a new kind of family, not bound by blood, but by trust, respect, and shared experiences. Tom often reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them together. He had been a man of solitude for years, comfortable with the rhythm of his own life and hesitant to change. Yet, the arrival of these 5 women had reshaped everything. They had brought vitality, knowledge, and connection into his world. In helping them survive and thrive, Tom had discovered something profound, that giving and receiving kindness could transform not only others' lives, but one's own as well. By the time spring was in full bloom, the ranch had been fully transformed. The barn was organized and welcoming, the animals healthy and well cared for, and the garden flourishing. Laughter and conversation filled the air. The widows had become indispensable companions, each contributing uniquely to the household. Tom, once a solitary cowboy, had become a patriarch in a small, resilient, and loving community. The transformation extended beyond the practical. Tom had learned to trust again, to rely on others, and to cherish relationships that were built on mutual respect. The widows had rediscovered hope, stability, and a sense of home. Together, they had created a life that was not only sustainable but joyful, filled with learning, shared purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they could rely on one another. In quiet moments, Tom would often sit on the porch and look out over the land. The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude and routine, now radiated warmth, life, and energy. He reflected on how much had changed, how unexpected circumstances had brought these 5 remarkable women into his life, and how together they had built something enduring. He felt a deep gratitude for their presence, knowing that their lives were intertwined in ways that would last for years to come. The ranch, once a symbol of isolation, had become a beacon of hope, connection, and resilience. It was proof that even in the harshest conditions, kindness and trust could flourish. Tom Harris had learned that life's most meaningful moments often came from opening one's heart to others, even when it felt risky or uncertain. And in return, he had received something priceless: family, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose. Time on the ranch moved with a gentle rhythm, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, the care of animals, and the ever-changing seasons. Tom Harris, who had once lived in quiet solitude for so many years, now found his life filled with laughter, work, and the warm presence of the 5 women who had become like family to him. The ranch was no longer simply a place to survive. It had become a home, a haven, and a center of life, learning, and hope. By now, the women had fully settled into the routines of the ranch, each finding a role that matched their strengths. Jana continued to lead with quiet authority, organizing chores, caring for the animals, and making sure the household ran smoothly. Another woman had taken a special interest in the garden, expanding it to grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Two others became skilled with the livestock, learning quickly how to care for horses and cows, while the youngest focused on tending the barn, mending tools, and preparing meals. Together, they worked as a team, each contributing to the well-being of the household and the land. Tom watched them with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and wonder. He had never imagined that opening his doors to strangers could bring such richness into his life. Over the months, he had come to realize that family was not always defined by blood. It could be built through trust, shared work, and mutual respect. The widows had brought not just companionship, but wisdom, courage, and warmth, filling the empty spaces of his heart and his home. Their days began early, as they always had on the ranch. The cold mornings were met with the sound of animals stirring, the soft murmur of conversation, and the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. Tom and the women worked side by side, preparing meals, feeding animals, repairing fences, and tending to the garden. Though the work was hard, it was fulfilling. Each task completed brought a sense of accomplishment, but more importantly, it strengthened the bonds between them. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would gather around the fire. Stories were shared, laughter filled the air, and simple meals were enjoyed together. Tom often listened as the women recounted tales of their lives before the fire, their families, and the traditions they had carried with them. Their stories were filled with both sorrow and joy, hardship and resilience. Tom sometimes shared stories of his own, of Mary, of his years on the ranch, and of the lessons life had taught him. These evenings became the heart of their lives, a time for connection, reflection, and the quiet joy of companionship. The widows, in turn, learned from Tom. He taught them how to handle difficult situations on the ranch, how to care for animals in sickness and health, and how to navigate the land safely. They listened carefully, absorbing every word, every tip, every lesson. In return, they offered him knowledge of their traditions, the plants and herbs of the desert, and ways to preserve food naturally. They also taught him small skills for daily life, how to make candles, how to weave baskets, and even songs and dances that had been passed down through generations. The ranch had become a place of learning as much as survival, a space where knowledge, skill, and culture flowed freely between them. One particularly memorable day, a storm swept across the desert. The wind howled, the rain fell in heavy sheets, and the temperature dropped sharply. The animals were restless, and the usual quiet of the ranch was replaced by a sense of urgency. Tom and the women worked tirelessly, securing the barn, moving the animals to safety, and checking the fences. The storm raged for hours, but when it finally passed, they stood together, exhausted but victorious. In that moment, Tom realized how much the women had become his strength, his support, and his family. They had endured hardships together and had come out stronger on the other side. As the seasons changed, so too did the landscape of the ranch. Spring brought new growth, flowers bloomed, and the garden thrived. Summer brought long, hot days, filled with the hum of insects, the smell of fresh grass, and the sound of animals grazing contentedly. Autumn brought cool winds and the rich colors of changing leaves, a reminder that life was always in motion. Through every season, the household adapted, worked, and flourished together. Tom found himself reflecting on how far they had all come, from strangers seeking shelter to a family that relied on one another, supported one another, and celebrated one another. Tom also noticed the changes within himself. He had always been a man of independence, relying solely on his own strength and judgment. But the presence of the widows had taught him that life was richer when shared, that collaboration and trust could bring unexpected rewards. He had grown more patient, more empathetic, and more open to joy. He had learned to appreciate the beauty of daily life, not just the grand moments, and to see value in the simple acts of care and kindness. The widows had also flourished. The fear and uncertainty that had marked their arrival slowly melted away, replaced by confidence, stability, and a sense of belonging. They had survived tragedy, but now they were thriving, not just surviving, but building a life that was meaningful, safe, and full of hope. They laughed more freely, sang while working, and even planned small celebrations together. Birthdays, the changing seasons, and the little victories that marked their lives on the ranch. Their bond with Tom deepened over time. They trusted him not just as a provider of shelter but as a mentor, a friend, and a protector. Tom, in turn, relied on them emotionally and practically. He found comfort in their presence, joy in their laughter, and peace in their company. He began to see the ranch not only as his home, but as a shared space, a place where love, trust, and resilience lived alongside the animals, the land, and the seasons. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the distant mountains, Tom and Ayanna sat together on the porch, sipping tea. They watched the horses graze peacefully, the wind rustling through the grass, and the women working in the garden. "I never thought life could change like this," Tom said quietly. Ayanna smiled. "Neither did we. But sometimes when people come together, life surprises us. You opened your heart and your home, and now we all have a place where we belong." Tom nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "I think I understand now. Family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who stands by you, who cares for you, and who you care for in return." As the years passed, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a sanctuary for those in need, a place where kindness and trust were the foundation of daily life. Word spread quietly among neighbors and local communities about the unusual but inspiring household. People came to see the thriving ranch, the happy animals, the blooming garden, and the warmth of a home filled with care and respect. Some brought small gifts, seeds, or tools. Others sought advice on ranching or survival. Tom and the widows shared freely, extending the compassion that had first brought them together. Tom often reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. He thought of the day the widows first appeared at his doorstep, shivering and weary, asking for shelter. At the time, he had been cautious, uncertain, and hesitant. Yet that moment had transformed everything. By opening his doors, he had not only saved lives but had created a family, found companionship, and discovered a new sense of purpose. The widows had brought him joy, resilience, and hope, the very things he had thought were gone forever. The household continued to grow stronger, supported by routines, trust, and shared labor. They celebrated successes, faced challenges together, and cared for one another in both ordinary and extraordinary moments. Tom found himself more connected to the land, the animals, and the people around him. The widows, too, flourished, creating a life that honored their past while embracing the present. Together, they had built something rare and enduring, a home defined not by walls or property, but by love, trust, and the strength of human connection. One winter evening, as snow gently fell over the plains, Tom sat by the fire with the women gathered around. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. He realized that life, once measured in solitude and routine, was now measured in shared experiences, kindness, and resilience. He felt gratitude for the unexpected turns that had brought them together, and pride in the life they had built as a family. Tom Harris, the retired cowboy who had once lived alone, had discovered something remarkable. By opening his heart and home to those in need, he had found a renewed sense of purpose, love, and community. The ranch was no longer a place of isolation. It was alive, vibrant, and filled with the warmth of family, friendship, and shared human connection. The story of 5 widows seeking shelter, and a lonely cowboy offering it had blossomed into a life of hope, joy, and enduring bonds. a life that would continue to inspire anyone who heard it. And so the ranch thrived, the family grew stronger, and the desert landscape, once silent and empty, became a place of life, laughter, and love. The women and Tom had learned the same lesson. Kindness, trust, and compassion could transform lives, and even in the harshest circumstances, family could be found in the most unexpected ways. Together, they had created a home that would endure through seasons, storms, and years to come.